Hey guys, Rid here. I've seen a lot of videos out there providing individual tips for improving their aim, including some ways to get into aim training, but I haven't seen a comprehensive guide for a beginner getting into aim training or somebody transitioning to dedicated aim training on what the steps are and how to do it. So that's why I want to make this video. The idea behind this is sort of like a starter pack where I'm going to cover at a high level all the components you need to get started with aim training. Maybe you recently converted from console to PC, or like me, just decided one day to get into competitive first-person shooters because I got a 140 hertz monitor and I'm like, I got to use this thing. And up until now, your mouse sens is like 16,000 DPI with 8 sens in game, which again was me. Whatever your reasoning is, my objective is for you to get all the information you need to get started from this video and give you the confidence that this information is accurate, curated, and up to date. Then I'm going to provide my sources if you want to get into further detail on any subject. So first things first, posture and ergonomics. It's always the first thing that people talk about, and for good reason. Now, I'm not a medical expert, and there are way better guides out there than I can put together. So I'll just link to guides I suggest in the description below. But the important aspects are, 1, adjust your chair so your feet are flat on the floor and your back should be up against the back of your chair when you're training. If you can't set your feet flat so your knees are level with your hips, it may be necessary to use a stool for support. You want to adjust your monitors so you can look at them straight ahead and not side to side or up and down. I see a lot of people post videos on the Reddit where it shows them looking down this whole time, and that's how their neck is positioned. That's a bad long-term habit. Your arms should rest at a 90-degree angle, and most of your arms should be able to rest on your desk or your chair arm. And sometimes your arm will float when you're aiming, but you need to be able to support it. This is one thing most ergonomics guide overlook because they're geared toward office productivity workers and not gamers. And we're going to be needing a large mouse pad and range of motion to work with. So stretches, I normally stretch before every aim training session. Only takes a couple minutes. There's a link in the description of which stretches I perform. It's really going to help reduce your chances of injury with something like repetitive stress disorder. I personally have been using PC games since 3, maybe even 5. I started out on Commodore 64, worked my way up from there. I've been using a mouse for 30 plus years. If you're serious about getting into competitive FPS and serious about your aim training, don't overlook it. Choosing a mouse, first thing you'll need to understand your mouse grip type. On screen are the 3 most common grip types to help you understand what your current mouse grip is. The 2 most common recommended in competitive aiming are claw and fingertip. If you're just starting out with a mouse, choose one of these grip types and stay with it. I'm fingertip. I was palm grip for a long time. If you also been using a mouse for a long time in your palm grip, you should probably get into fingertip grip. For choosing a mouse, Rocket Jump Ninja, again, he has a fantastic video that will walk you through his using his mouse search. It's what I use to find my mouse. To use it, you'll have to measure out your hand size. I suggest following it to a T, so measure your actual hand, then input the data into the mouse search calculator linked in the description. Some commonly recommended mice in the AIM community are Logitech mice like G Pro Wireless, which is super expensive, but it's really nice, G203 or the G305, which are lower budget versions, but similar, Zowie mice, Glorious Model O or O-. There's a lot more, of course, but those are some of the most common ones. Generally, lighter is better, and so is higher range of motion. Wireless tech has come a long way, and pros often use wireless mice, so you can too. If you choose a wired mouse, just know that the cable it comes with may restrict your range of movement. People often mod their wired mouse with paracord, which makes it stiffer and less prone to wear, so the cord doesn't snag on your pad. If you don't want to deal with that mess, just pick a wireless mouse. If your wireless mouse uses a physical battery, aimers will often replace AA battery with a AAA battery instead, and then they'll use a plastic spacer or tinfoil of all things to minimize weight. As far as mouse feet go, most aimers choose to replace the native feet with skates. It's such a dumb name. I hate that name. It's like should there be Z's at the end? I don't know. I'll provide a link in the description of where you can get cheap, reliable skates. But wow, that's a lot of info, isn't it? Look, don't worry too much. Your tools won't make you a great aimer. If you buy a $500 tennis racket, you're not going to become Roger Federer overnight. You pick a mouse that fits your hand size and grip type, and then you move on. Don't get stuck on it. If you get really into aiming, later on you can make adjustments to your equipment if that becomes your bottleneck. Choosing a mousepad. So I'm going to provide a link in the description to this mousepad resource that Hoya put together. Noticing a theme yet? Pretty much everything I'm talking about has some kind of resource associated with it where you can get more detail. It has a great list of mouse pads with ratings on how fast they wear, how fast or slow they are. The main things to consider is making sure it's large enough for your desk space. Normally, you will be running a much lower sens than you're probably used to right now, and you're going to need 2 to 3 feet of desk space for your mouse pad. If you play tracking heavy games like Apex Legends, you'll want a faster pad. If you play low time to kill games or TTK like Valorant and Counter-Strike, then you probably want a slower pad. Like the mouse, this is preference. And like the mouse, a good pad won't automatically make you a better aimer. If you just want a reliable pad, go with a Zowie GSR SE or Decanic Control. When making this video, mouse pads are hard to find right now. So if you can't find either of these, you can use a Logitech G640 in a pinch. I've used it. I like it. It just wears out fast. They're pretty much always in stock from what I've seen. So as far as monitors go, this is very preference based. You should pick a 144 Hz monitor if you can afford it and be capable of running up to 144 FPS in your game of choice. You could still get into FPS aiming without this, but know it's going to be a limiting factor, especially with fast strafes and reactivity. Make sure that your monitor has low input lag, less than 1 millisecond, and supports G-Sync and FreeSync. Like I mentioned in the posture section, make sure you're able to look at the monitor straight on without craning your neck. So you've probably seen stuff on sleeves, and it starts to really get into neckbeard territory, but a sleeve does help reduce friction on the pad, especially if you sweat a lot or your mouse pad feels swampy. I don't have AC, so when it gets really hot, I sweat and I have to use a sleeve, and it does help. I wouldn't get one until you realize it becomes a bottleneck in your improvement. You can just get any basic Amazon compression sleeve, like what bikers would use. So finding your sens and mouse acceleration. Sensitivity is shortened to sens by most people in the AIM community. It's just faster to say. In case you want to sound cool and smart and like you know what you're doing, just say sens. One of the most common questions new aimers have is, what sens should I use? And more often, the sens you should use is lower than what you think it is. So before starting this process, you should disable mouse acceleration, which is on by default in Windows. If you're PC gaming, you're probably using Windows. Disable it like this. You can also go to this video for more detail about disabling mouse acceleration permanently for all time. If that's your thing, you're just going to have to do some regedit hacks and all sorts of stuff. I didn't mess with it. If you want to, it's up to you. But that said, I should point out there's a lot more to mouse acceleration than simply saying it's bad, turn it off. For now, I would suggest just turning it off. But if you want to dig deeper, in the description, I'll link to a great article on the subject. The most popular way to find your sens is using the Perfect Sensitivity Approximation Method, or PSA. Again, there are better guides out there, so here's a link to a video on how to find your sens using the PSA method. It's what I did. It worked pretty well for me. I ended up not going with what it suggested, but most people need some kind of third-party confirmation that the sens is right. And so this is an empirical way that you can get this information. If you didn't watch the video, basically you just want a sens where you're able to perform a full 360 in your game of choice, starting from one end of the mousepad and swiping all the way across to the other end. Using the PSA method helps you fine-tune from there if you want. Generally, a higher sens will be useful for high TTK games that have a lot of tracking, like Apex Legends, and arcade shooters like Quake or Diabolical just came out. Lower sens will be useful for low TTK games that focus more on crosshair placement and accurate headshots, like CS and Valorant. What if you just want me to tell you what sens to go with? Okay, fine. You don't want to do the research. Use 25 to 35 centimeters per 360. Wait, what? Okay. cm per 360 or cm a rev is a universal way to describe mouse sens across different games. It's a measurement of the physical distance your mouse travels when doing a full 360-degree turn in-game. You can use a calculator like the one I link in the description to convert between different sensitivities. For example, I use approximately 35 cm a rev, and in Apex Legends, that translates to roughly 1.47 sens in-game with 800 DPI. Okay, now I'm bringing DPI into the mix. Just had to throw a wrench in, right? People tend to get really hung up on DPI. Don't overthink it. 400 DPI with 3.0 sens in-game is the same as 800 DPI and 1.5 sens in-game. That's really all there is to it. You can set your DPI to 400 or 800 and never touch it again. There's another reason why CM360 is the standard method for measuring sens, because too many variables contribute to in-game sens. So FOV settings. FOV, or field of view, is essentially the viewing angle that you see on screen when you're playing FPS games. The default FOV is usually 90 degrees, and this is customizable in most modern FPS games. It didn't used to be. Anima FPS has a great video on the subject, but for the purposes of the video, you should understand that a lower FOV will make it harder to see and track closer targets, especially fast strafing ones, but easier to see and track long distance targets since they will appear closer on your screen. That said, the AIM community has accepted 103 FOV as a standard, so you could start there. When we talk about aim training, you can increase this to 110 to 120 for target switching scenarios, especially ones that require 180 or 360 degree movement to track targets. So now you want to choose an aim trainer. Well, Prosper Aim has a great video going into more detail on the subject if you really want to get into detail, but the consensus right now in the AIM community is just use kovaaks FPS Aim Trainer. I do occasionally use AimBeast as well, and in my opinion, from the software perspective, it's better optimized with more customization, but right now kovaaks still has the most useful scenarios. And once you start getting into routines, you'll find that AimBeast just lacks the depth and you'll be chasing replacement scenarios so often, so just go with kovaaks. And before we start talking about how to get into aim training, you want to spend some time making sure you get consistent FPS around the maximum refresh rate your monitor supports. So if you have a 144 Hz monitor, you want to cap your FPS around 141 frames. Wait a second, aren't more frames always better? Good question. Just like every one of the other questions I'm sure you're asking yourself. For reasons other people go into great detail, the answer is, it depends. You could still experience stuttering as FPS fluctuates inconsistently. If you experience this problem, I experienced this problem with Apex, you can watch this video on how to get ahead of it. Basically what you want to do is download a program called RTSS and configure it to cap your frame rate at the highest FPS you can consistently achieve. Usually this is recommended just under what your refresh rate on your monitor is. So if you have a 144 Hz monitor, you'd want to cap it around 141 FPS. And then you want to configure your video card settings to disable anti-lag features like AMD anti-lag or NVIDIA ultra-low latency. Make sure you have G-Sync and FreeSync enabled. It should be automatic for the most part. And make sure to set your monitor settings to your max monitor refresh rate. This is probably the number one problem that people run into when they get 144 Hz monitors, is they forget to do this, and then 2 years later they realize that they've been running 60 Hz the whole time. Don't be one of those people. For FPS games you're playing, disable VSync every time. Play the game in dedicated full screen, not full screen borderless, and do not use in-game FPS limiters. After that, you should be looking to reduce video settings in order to achieve the consistent FPS you want. Most competitive FPS players use the lowest video settings possible. So for kovaaks specific settings, a quick note on opening kovaaks for the first time, it will take you to the trainer section by default, which is still in the process of being worked, and it won't give you access to all the scenarios that we're going to be doing and talking about in the routines. So there's a great short and sweet video on the subject for kovaaks specific settings. His name's Christmas is Canceled on YouTube, but the short version is, even though his is like a minute and a half, so just watch the video. Disable most on-screen artifacts such as the gun, laser, decals, hit markers. You want to minimize the things that are going to distract you from your goals, which is improving your aim and overall mouse feel. While starting out, it can't hurt to replicate your kovaaks sensitivity and FOV settings to the same of the FPS game that you want to play, but just know that you're going to be frequently adjusting sens and FOV in your aim training journey. Your goal would be to improve your overall mouse feel and not to memorize one-for-one mechanical situations. So in getting into aim routines, there's a lot of different aim routines out there. It can be very overwhelming. The most popular aim guide that most people start with is by Aimer7. But you will see a lot of pro aimer names like Zeke, Cowser, SDK, INS, Sinai, so on. I would strongly suggest us to start out with the Sparky fundamental aim routines. Sparky is a great community that you can join. They have a Discord, and they provide a lot of useful routines, guides, benchmarks for improving. The fundamental routines are broken out into different levels. You'll start with bronze, and you can go all the way up to ascended if you're a god. You can use the benchmarks and spreadsheet I link in the description to benchmark yourself and figure out where you should start. But if you're just starting out, chances are you'll begin with bronze. You can use the spreadsheet to track your progress as you improve. Other guides, such as Aimer 7's guide and the updated version by Thomas, I believe it's Thomas, they're still great reads for aiming philosophy, but you should still start out with the Sparky fundamentals until you're able to recognize and focus on improving your specific weaknesses. It can't hurt to use those guides. This video is geared toward, I'm just starting out, tell me what to do. I would suggest getting into the Sparky fundamental routines. Using playlists, Kovaaks recently introduced shareable playlists, which makes it easy to set up routines. You'll often see .plo files, which can be placed into the correct folder where Kovaaks is installed, or you can create and edit your own playlists, export them, and share them. Most scenarios are a minute in length, and most routines will suggest doing each scenario for 10 minutes. So you can set up that playlist to run that scenario 10 times. When starting out, I'd suggest just running the routines as built, but there's a method called 1x1, which is gaining popularity, where you run each scenario one time each and run the whole routine multiple times in your training session. So for aim scenario types, they're divided into 4 main types: clicking, tracking, target switching, movement. Anima has a great YouTube playlist on the different types for more detail. Short version, clicking refers to static or moving dots, popular with low TTK games like Valorant and CS, or if you're using snipers. Tracking is keeping your crosshair on a target for longer periods of time while they're moving, often changing direction with quick reaction. Games like Apex Legends, Quake, or Diabolical, they require a lot of tracking. Target switching is a combination of tracking and clicking skills, requiring you to quickly hop between multiple targets and keep your crosshair on low TTK targets while they're moving. Games like COD and Battlefield, or any shooter where there's a lot of combat situations with a high number of targets on screen and you're just trying to eliminate them as quickly as possible, that's going to be more of like a target switching focus scenario. Movement scenarios are any of the above 3 types, the only difference being you have to move, hence movement scenario. Pretty straightforward. Usually going to be strafing in these types of scenarios, so kind of AD spamming back and forth while eliminating targets. So how to train correctly? For the scenario types themselves, it's important to learn how to properly approach each type. Christmas is Cancelled has a great YouTube series on each type and how to do them, which I've set up below. You should check this out. It's fantastic. Make sure you read the descriptions in the Sparky Fundamental Guide, and they kind of cover how you should be doing the scenarios. In short, for clicking, you want to smoothly and precisely trace from dot to dot. Focus more on accuracy before increasing your speed. The general recommendation is to strive for 85 to 95% accuracy on these scenarios until you start focusing on speeding up. If you try to focus on speed too early, you will probably develop bad habits, and it's going to cause you to waste movement by over or undershooting targets and microadjusting a lot. Start slow, try to map out an optimal path from target to target. Avoid bad habits like changing targets mid-path. Let's say you start to move to one target and then change your mind and switch to another, and repeatedly shooting and missing the same target. Basically, you want to start developing a tempo where even if you miss a target, you just want to go for the next one. Over time, your accuracy and speed will improve, and don't try to force it. With tracking, you want to focus intensely on your smoothness and not over gripping your mouse. Your hand should be fairly relaxed, and you will have very shaky aim at first, which is your goal to improve. You want to force yourself to not predict bot movement when they change direction, ever, and just assume the bot will keep going in the same direction forever. Then react back when it changes direction. If you start predicting bot movement, you're going to cause bottlenecks in your improvement later on, even if it seems to get you higher scores in the short term. You should generally hold down left mouse button instead of gaming the scenario for higher accuracy. Don't sell yourself short by looking to get high scores versus improvement. You're only going to hurt yourself. Target switching is a combo of tracking and clicking, so most of the advice for tracking and clicking apply. Use your sound cues to help with building the pattern of your kill chain. You always want to know what your next target is before your current one is dead and swiftly move to eliminate that next target. Over time, you want to minimize overshooting targets so you can quickly eliminate them during tracking after you flick to the target. There's no real meaningful advice I can give you for movement scenarios, since the same advice for regular scenarios applies. They'll just be more difficult to pull off while you're moving. The one thing that I will say is don't just try to get high scores in the movement scenarios, but try to replicate the same type of movement that you would use in game, even if it results in smaller scores. That said, Aimer 7 has a great guide on improving your strafing overall, which I'll link to the description below. Some overall advice to improving your aim training. I want to make this video short, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I feel like there's some high-level wave top topics I should cover. Don't chase high scores or trick the system into getting high scores, kind of what I mentioned before. Your goal is to improve your aim and mouse feel, not get high scores. Actively focusing on reducing your bad habits will net you lower scores, but you will get better faster over time. It's kind of counterintuitive and it's hard to hold yourself accountable. I promise you that if you focus on this, you will get better. Practice consistently, every day if possible. An hour daily should be enough, but if you can't go that long, then it's better to do less amount of each scenario in the routine. Say, if you were going to do 10 times for the scenario, do it 5 times instead of cutting the routine short. In other words, you want to do the complete routine, just do less of each scenario in the routine. It's also better to train daily for 30 minutes instead of every other day for an hour. And don't freak out if your improvement in aim training doesn't translate in game, or you get worse in your game of choice. This is normal, and in some cases, it's a direct result of unlearning bad habits. You're going to have bad days, bad weeks, lots of external factors like diet, exercise, stress, sleep. They can all affect your training, just like any other type of training, like if you're lifting weights. Expect to make incremental progress over time, and there's going to be peaks and valleys along the way. Isolating and improving problems. So as you start to improve, you'll start recognizing where your weaknesses and bad habits are. This is actually what you want to strive to be able to do as you're improving, not just blindly repeating routines over and over, expecting to eventually get better. Blind practice does not make perfect. You can't expect to just do the same thing over and over again and expect different results. This has to be an active process that you're engaged in if you really want to improve fast. Some techniques you can use to isolate and improve include watching VODs of your runs and watching which mistakes you're making. Look for things like wasted movement. You might not really know what to look for at first, but just actively looking at your VODs after you're done training can help you with understanding what you're doing wrong. Watch videos of great aimers like Sparky Grandmasters performing the routines and performing the scenarios to ensure you're doing them correctly. Generally, you just want to actively participate in your training and think about what you might be doing wrong while you're doing the scenarios and look to correct them during your training. Like if you see that you're over flicking a lot, you're not smooth, or you're swooping around while you're going from target to target instead of directly tracing a line, then just sit there and focus on getting better at that without thinking about getting better at your scores. It'll help you over the long run. Check out guides like Sparky's guide on fixing specific issues. Participate in the AIM community and ask for help. Join the Sparky Discord. Join reddit.com/r/FPS aim trainer. Post your VODs. Ask for advice. Don't be afraid to put yourself out there. These communities have common objectives to improve aim. Take advantage of it. You're always going to deal with assholes and people that are like, oh, you put 150 hours in and you're still bronze. You suck. For every person like that, I guarantee you there's 10 other people, one of which is me, who wants you to get better and wants you to improve. I want to see every single one of us in the aim training community get better. I have gained a lot from the community and I've learned a lot along the way. I think it only makes sense to help everybody else too. And that's all I have. I'm trying to make a lot more videos like this in the future, and I'm happy to take feedback on topics or how I can just make my videos better, even if it's make them shorter. I try to make them as succinct and as useful as possible, and it's hard to find that balance between providing information and making it easy to digest. But if I missed anything important, or if you thought that there was a better way I could have presented this information, please provide feedback in the comments. I'm always looking for ideas to improve. And if you have ideas for other videos, things that you wish you knew, or videos that you think I should make, reach out to me. I'd love to know that. But thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.